In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains why the unknown needs to be conquered and what happens if you don't do it.
So anyway, so they elect Marduk, and Marduk's got all these eyes, and he can speak, and so he thinks, all right. He says, if I win, I'm going to get the Tablet of Destinies, and then I'm top god. And they say, yeah, whatever. If you win, no problem. So he goes out to fight Tiamat, and he takes a sword, and he takes a net, and they meet on the battlefield, and he encapsulates Tiamat in a net, which I think is a brilliant metaphor again, because chaos is amorphous and unformed, right? And if you want to conquer it, you have to encapsulate it within a net. A net, you have to make it into something rather than something amorphous. And so, look, maybe a client comes to me and they say, oh, I've been having these terrible symptoms. My heart races and my breath, I can't catch my breath, and I think I'm going to die. And I think maybe I'm having a heart attack, and I'm always at the hospital, and they tell me that there's nothing wrong with me, but I have, I'm afraid all the time, and I'm starting not to go out. And I say, oh, you have agoraphobia. Lots of people have that. You're not the only person like that in the world. Not only that, it has a name. We know what to do about it, and there's a treatment course. And they go, and the reason for that is that the unknown has just been turned into a known unknown, and that's a massive improvement. And so the person who conceptualizes the anomalous situation fastest is in fact the leader. That's the definition of leadership. It's like, we don't know what's going on. This is what's going on. And when you say this is what's going on, you also simultaneously say, here's a million other things that could have been going on that aren't. So it's a process of radical simplification, and it lowers the stress levels immediately. Anyway, so Tiamat goes, or Marduk goes, and he gets her in a net, and then he splits her in half, and he makes heaven out of one half and the earth out of the other for the human beings. And he goes back to... And he defeats Kingu and all the monsters, and then he goes back to tell the other gods, and they're pretty happy about this. And Kingu had the Tablet of Destinies, but Marduk took that from him, and now he has it, so he gets to determine destiny. And he makes human beings out of Kingu's blood, which is quite an interesting little twist to the story, and he makes them to serve the gods. And so that's that. And so the idea is that the hero who can see and can communicate is also the hero who separates out the elements of existence so that it becomes a habitable place. And that humans should serve that. Serve Marduk. Well, you have to serve something. Well, you're going to serve a natural force of some sort. You're going to be all anger, you're going to be all lust, you're going to be all love, or you're going to be all hunger. Or are you going to represent some integrated, some balanced and integrated emergent property of that's also socially constructed, so that you're a balance of natural forces and you're a civilized person, and that's some sort of essence, and that's what you're going to strive for. Well, that's Marduk. So you're supposed to be a good Marduk. Now, Marduk is immortal. Now, the only person who was identified with Marduk in the Mesopotamian realm was the emperor. Now, they lived in a walled city. And so the reason the emperor was sovereign was because he was supposed to be the embodiment of Marduk on earth, which meant that his job was to transform chaos into order. Whenever chaos threatened, he was supposed to transform it back into order. So this is what the Mesopotamians did at the New Year's celebration. When the year is rejuvenated, right? The old year dies. Of course, we know that because we still do it. And the new year is this new baby. It's a time of new beginnings. So the Mesopotamians would take the emperor out of the city, and they'd strip him of all his emperor clothes, and then they'd make him recite all the ways during the last year that he'd been a bad Marduk. Like he hadn't been encountering chaos properly, and he hadn't been keeping order properly, so he had to confess all of his inadequacies. Then the priest would whack him with a glove as a ritual punishment, and then they'd take all the statues out of the old gods out of the city, and then they'd represent the battle between Marduk and Tiamat, and then the emperor was Marduk, and he would win, and then he would have sex with a ritual prostitute, which was, this is a much tougher concept, but it's a way of symbolizing the fact that if the creative force encounters the positive element of the feminine, it's like the prince in Sleeping Beauty getting Sleeping Beauty from the grasp of the evil queen who turns into the dragon. It's exact, because it's weird, right? You've seen that, and you understand it, right? Sleeping Beauty's all in the tower. She's covered by, she's hemmed in by a huge fields of thorns. The evil queen is trying to stop the prince from getting to her. She turns into a dragon, which makes absolutely no sense, but everyone follows it. And then he has to fight his way through that to get to the maiden. It's the same idea in a different context. And then order, productive order being reestablished, everybody goes back into the kingdom and it's renewed for the next year. And that's the idea behind Mesopotamian sovereignty, and it's bloody brilliant. Because it's it's the beginnings of law in some sense. It's the idea that to be proper, even if you're a despot, even if you're the king, there's a sacred pattern of behavior that you must adhere to, which is the consequence of a congress of the gods deciding what the most effective mode of being is. It's staggeringly brilliant. And it took that story, we just have no idea how long that story took to emerge. I would say it's the consequence of the full course of human evolutionary history. Like there are elements in it that are as old as mammals, and maybe older than that. You know, if you think about those patterns being embedded in behavior long before they were abstracted out into representations, it's unbelievably archaic and ancient. And so you have Tiamat, the great mother. You have Apsu, the great father. You have Marduk, the archetypal son. You have Kingu, who's the negative element of Marduk, right? And you have the drama of all those characters interacting across time. And that's the mythological representation of reality. And Tiamat, to tie it into the neuropsychology that we talked about, you know, we talked about anomaly, right? And how anomaly, you have a box that you're in that is your world. But that box doesn't contain everything in the world. There's a lot of things that aren't in it, and sometimes they poke their head in like a snake. And then that's disruptive. And what do? Well, you have to voluntarily encounter the snake and either defeat it or make something valuable out of it. You know, you can cower and hide, but all that generally means is the snake grows and grows until there's hardly any you in the box and there's all snake. And that's actually the Mesopotamian story. It's like if the elder gods weren't so careless and had been paying attention and hadn't killed Apsu, Tiamat would have stayed asleep the whole time. So that's the level of isomorphism. So what's fascinating, but I think inevitable, is that the mythology reflects the physiology. But how could it not? The physiology produced the mythology. Like, of course that's going to be the case. It shouldn't be a surprise. The reverse should be a surprise. It's like there's no relationship between these old stories and the way that human beings are structured. It's like, well, no, that's a dumb idea. That's the Mesopotamian creation myth, and it's a killer. It's a staggering story, and you know it still sits, whether we know it or not. It sits at the very base of our culture. It's Apsu, that story, and if we kill it, which we will or have been, then look out. You know, we know the story from so long ago. If you let your culture die and act carelessly towards it, all hell will break loose. And it's no joke. So here we are trying to revivify it. It's pretty weird that these things happen to be real. But then if you think about it, well, how could it be otherwise? You know, I mean, you think all these people who lived before us for the tens of millions of years that, you know, we've had our vaguely human predecessors were stupid? They weren't. And they weren't ignorant, and they weren't superstitious or any of those things. They were tough enough so that we're here.